for inviting me to this session. Paralytic strabismus is really a big subject, and this will be an overview with just highlighting the important points. As we all know, concomitant strabismus could be spastic, paralytic, or restrictive, and the paralytic is one in which the secondary deviation is more than the primary. It may be neurogenic or myogenic, and the restrictive ones classically can be distinguished because the limitation of movements is more than what you would expect from the ocular deviation. And it can, in the neurogenic thing, it may be a paresis, which is partial, or it may be total, which is known as paralysis. It may be involving the nerve, then it is fascicular, or it may be involving the nucleus, then it is called a nuclear nerve palsy. And sometimes it may be involving a gaze palsy. It may be congenital or acquired, and their associated features will distinguish the localization. The horizontal gaze palsy is classically not having diplopia because it is involving both the nuclei simultaneously. So it will not have a diplopia, whereas infranuclear things have, or internuclear conditions will have diplopia. Classically, the internuclear is the internuclear ophthalmoplegia. Remember the anatomy always, the third, the fourth, and the sixth nerve from where they are coming. The fourth nerve, remember, is taking a dorsal route, and it can be easily injured in head injuries. And in the intraorbital course, again, the superior and the inferior divisions of third nerve are separated, which may involve differently. And for the nuclear palsies, we have to be thinking about that. But can you just switch off the sound on this? So, just remember that we need to always remember to look at the papilledema in the fundus and the optic atrophy, which may be there in some cases of paralytic strabismus. Left lateral rectus palsy. Now let's go on to the sixth nerve palsy. It may be having a classic head posture. This is some of the slides are part of a thing which we had given for a. So in this classically you see the esotropia, the limitation of abduction, and in the opposite gaze the binocularity is possible, so they will usually have a head posture. So this is what we should keep in mind. And the stages in paralytic strabismus you'll see in the books. I don't want to go into the details, but remember the stage of paresis, the stage in which there is a contracture of the opposite muscle, the medial rectus, and also the contralateral RMR, and finally the inhibitional palsies can occur. Diplopia charting should be done, and the Lees and Hess charting, these we can talk about. But basically remember, even the sixth nerve palsies, recent and later cases will have a difference in presentation. A force reduction test can easily differentiate if there is any contracture of the opposite muscle under topical anesthesia, limbus grip with the Pierce-Hoskins forces preferably, so that we do not cause any hemorrhage at the time. And if you use a decongestion either by brimonidine, as Dr. Ramesh would like to use, or maybe any other decongestant that you're fond of, patient to look in the opposite direction, and then the passive duction is tested. Another thing which is important in paralytic strabismus is the active force generation test. That is, if the muscle still has some tug which will be felt by the forceps when you are asking the eye to be looked in that direction. So when the tug is felt, that tells us that partial force is still possible, and then recession and dissection is still possible in these cases. A non-touch technique of seeing the force reduction test is by doing a differential tonometry. Even in children, if you can do an NCT, you can know in different gazes that there may be some restriction which is there. And pass pointing in the recent cases can be seen. The localization is going to be there, which will help us in knowing where it is there on the basis of the associated features. Seventh nerve is taking a course, and sixth and seventh nerve can be easily involved if there is a nuclear sixth nerve palsy. And similarly, the internuclear ophthalmoplegia may be there. But the one thing which we need to remember is nuclear sixth nerve palsies are different from a horizontal gaze palsies, although there may be some interaction of the medial rectus of the opposite side, because the motor neurons and also the interneurons are affected in a nuclear involvement. So that has to be kept in mind, but it will be an asymmetric presentation compared to a PPRF lesion. And the other associated things will tell us. So how do we manage the cases of sixth nerve palsy? Prisms, occlusion of the eye to avoid diplopia in the intervening period that we are waiting for 6 months' time. We never would like to operate before 6 months. We have to wait and watch. Botox may be used in the intervening period if you want to have earlier rehabilitation, but we need to follow up every 6 weeks to see that there is no change in the deviations. And then when we decide for surgery, we will do a force reduction test, as we had talked about, and resect only if the lateral rectus has stone. If it is totally paralytic, then there is no point in doing a resection. It is better to do the vertical rectus transpositionings. Now this individual has a movement past the midline, so such cases will be amenable to a resection possible. And after the R&R surgery is another lady who had a beautiful result after the R&R procedure. So when we do the transposition procedures is when the eye doesn't move beyond the midline, and there are various ones which have been described. The most useful by us is the Hummel-Schimm's procedure, or a modification of that. And we may add Foster sutures to augment the vectorization force of the vertical muscles in aid of the paralytic sixth nerve. So after the surgery, you may get very good results of the ESO, some improvement in abduction, but abduction limitation may still be there to some extent, but the head posture gets corrected very dramatically. Strabismus fixus convergence are extreme cases of sixth nerve palsies, and they may have a very tight positive FDD, and these may require supramaximal recessions. But at times you have to be careful. Some myopes may have a presentation of a strabismus fixus because of a nasalization of the superior and the inferior rectus. So these cases require a loop myopexy to tighten the superior rectus and the lateral rectus by non-absorbable sutures, or you may use the silicone bands. Third nerve palsies classically have a presentation which we need to remember. It may involve all the extraocular muscles except the lateral rectus and superior oblique. It may also supply the LPS. The ptosis should never be missed. Sphincter and ciliary muscles. So in the exam, when you have, never forget to see the near vision. It will give you that whether there is an involvement of internal ophthalmoplegia or not. The nuclear, fascicular and the orbital divisions will have a differential involvement. So you will have different clinical presentations in a third nerve palsy. Again, ischemic neuropathy. So the cause itself will differentiate the type of presentation, because ischemic neuropathy spares the pupils in at least 70% of the cases, but 30% may still have an involvement in even ischemic. So don't just rule out that. And it may be partial or it may recover partially. It may have aberrant regenerations. It may have associated neurological deficits. So keep these considerations in mind whenever you're dealing with third nerve palsies. A classical presentation with the ptosis, with the anisocoria, and the eye in extreme abduction with the exotropia, which you'll see adduction limitation is there, superior rectus is limited and inferior rectus is underacting. So when you have this, and this is the explanation why we have the ischemic lesions sparing the pupils, because these are being spared by the vesa nervorum. The nuclear lesions again have differential presentation depending upon the subnucleus which is involved. So you may have a nuclear lesion in which there is no ptosis at all, or whenever ptosis is there, there will be a bilateral ptosis. Whenever pupils are involved in a nuclear lesion, it will be always bilateral. Otherwise, you can very well be sure that uniocular pupillary involvement is a fascicular third nerve palsy. Post-traumatic cases may have associated fourth nerve along with, because of the dorsal crossing that's there, and you can easily see them by seeing the head tilt test. That is an upshoot on either side of head tilt. Cases of aberrant regeneration with the von Graefe sign, what you'll see here that there is a lid retraction on looking down or on looking on the adduction. And these cases can be used to your advantage by operating on the opposite eye to correct not only the exodeviation but also the aberrant regeneration, correcting the ptosis. The synergistic divergence is another condition which should be kept in mind. It's a variant of a third nerve palsy with an aberrant regeneration. So these cases, if you see, there is abduction, but abduction is more when you ask him to look on the opposite side. So this is a synergistic divergence. You'll see more abduction when he's looking on the opposite side because of the aberrant involvement. The diplopia and the Hess charts will be done. Internuclear ophthalmoplegia is, as I said, another variant of third nerve in which either the MLF is involved or even involving the medial rectus subnucleus. What you classically see is that adduction is limited, but when he's asked to converge, the eye can adduct. So this is differentiating an internuclear ophthalmoplegia. This is the anatomy which is kept in mind, and various syndromes which are associated you can see in the books. You can go back and see. And involvement of cavernous sinus, which may be sometimes requiring medical treatment urgently, should be kept in mind. Similarly, the orbital lesions may present as Tolosa-Hunt, an ophthalmoplegic syndrome in which you will have pain, very severe pain, and these are amenable to steroids. So management in third nerve palsy, it's a complete oculomotor diagnosis. It will vary individually, your management. You need to again see for the natural recovery, 6, 9 or 12 months. You require crutch classes if there is a ptosis because the surgery is not going to be that helpful, and surgery is done. So this is how the crutch classes are helpful. And the realistic goals are to correct the deviation only in the primary position, and like in this case an R&R was decided because the eye was having the possibility of some movement, and in this, after the surgery, the eyes are straight. Otherwise, superior obliques have been tried, but they are not a good choice because there is a limitation of depression in abduction. The better thing is periosteal flaps, as Dr. Rosenbaum's group was doing, but then we started doing the anchoring of the globe to the periosteum of the medial side, which gives very good results, and also the lateral rectus periosteal fixation along with the medial rectus resection of 8 mm, which can correct the deviations very nicely. Coming finally to the superior oblique palsies, which may be presenting congenitally with the head posture and classically a head tilt test showing positive. As you see in this, when he is looking to the sides, the right hypertropia worsens, and whenever you do a head tilt, then you will see that there is a marked upshoot of the eye on this side of head tilt. So hypertropia increasing in adduction and upshoot on right head tilt test. The diplopia charting will tell you the torsion will be seen, and the Hess chart will also show you the torsional fields. Superior oblique palsies can be picked up on the fundus by seeing the extorsion on the globe. And bilateral superior oblique palsy should always be kept in mind in head traumas. Subjective complaints of torsion, objective torsion being more than 10 degrees, and alternating hypertropia on an alternating head tilt test, and a V pattern heterotropia, which is ezo in the down gaze and making the person assume a chin down position like a bull going to hit you. So superior oblique palsy, how do we manage? This will be based on the involvement of the on the NAPS classification that you can see, but mostly we go and do the inferior oblique weakening. Sometimes when the laxity of the superior oblique is there, you can do a tucking, and when there is a tight superior rectus, you may do a superior rectus recession. Rarely a contralectal inferior rectus recession may be done, and a modified Harada-Ito is done whenever there is a bilateral superior oblique palsy which has very little of vertical deviation but markedly in torsional problem. So that can be corrected. These are the just the steps showing you after the inferior oblique surgery and the superior oblique tucking after the superior oblique tuck, and the Harada-Ito before and after the surgery. These are the steps, and we already had, I think, presentations of the videos. And lastly, just to for the students, you remember when we have a third nerve palsy and you have to look for a fourth nerve working normally or not, you need to focus your attention on the nasal vessel and ask the person to look down and see the intorting nasal vessel. So that will tell you. And never forget to do the binocular fields of fixation. So I would like to end my talk here with the mention of the congenital cranial disinnervation disorders, which are basically congenital neuropathies, and they can be detected now well with the high definition MRIs which we can do. Thank you all.